Right, yeah. Welcome to the Round Squared Round Table number 2 for the SpatialOS episode. I'm joined by Joel, our senior technical designer. You're definitely senior technical designer now. James, our CEO and CTO, and Jord, our VP of engineering. So pretty good selection of technical people for our technical dev blog. I'm going to say technical as many times as possible in this. So let's jump right into it. First question, how will players enter the game world? Will they drop in from a plane, or will it be a whole new system?
I mean, the technical side of that, perhaps you can comment a bit on that.
I mean, I also think the more interesting side of it is not just the coming into the world, but how you're landing. Yeah. You know, like so far in everything we've put out, we've done a highly concentrated talk on the deformation and destructibility in the world. And I think one of the best showcases of that is when you're actually, you know, landing into the world, and you know, you can see all these branches from trees and stuff being affected, and you know, when you've landed, you've left your mark, and you can see other players' marks. And I think that's like, you know, coming into the world is really cool, and seeing like everyone else around you, and with it loading in. But the actual sequence of landing, I think, is one of the it's one of the key differentiators that you'll see between our game and other battle royale games when you first enter the world.
Okay. On the topic of you know, that falling flight, that kind of like what you can see and so on. Next question is, what will the render distance be like? And are we going to be prioritizing realism, seeing really, really far, or frame rates, or are we doing something cool to kind of mix that up and like make it do both?
I wouldn't say that those two things are really mutually exclusive. I mean, one of the whole reasons why we are using SpatialOS is to not think of it as, you know, one system that we're rendering things from afar. You know, the idea is that these game worlds get, these game workers or their work gets stitched together, and then we provide your player a view into that world. So in terms of render distances, we want players to be able to see things that are happening on the other side of the map, but it depends on the interest range of those things that's going on. And you know, how that affects FPS. Well, I mean, we're, you know, optimizing the game in order to, you know, cull all the objects you don't need to see, and making it a priority to make sure that everything that you can see is done in the best way we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, to give a more specific answer, like, people should expect, you know, from games that they've played so far, that there has been a compromise between how much detail you can see in the distance versus your frame rate. I think if you look at the sort of some of the key innovations Mavericks had that sort of blow that out the water, enable us to have way more detail in the distance than you'd expect, it comes down to the sort of more recent rendering technology we're using. That includes things like LODs, like which are level of detail. It's a very standard technique. It's to make things, you know, that smaller because they're in the distance, take up, you know, not as much resource.
Yeah,
effectively.
On that, we actually have our next question is. So I'm going to jump in there really. How are we handling level of detail across distance? Not only in respect to this, but if you can go into detail on some games where you see like different foliage, trees, grass, that kind of stuff, and it cuts it out at different ranges, it kind of pops out, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a bit of an overview so basic LODs, the idea of making things more efficient in the distance, has been around for a very long time. Mavericks is on the bleeding edge of the latest innovations of this technology. So that includes not just, okay, there are lots of individual small things in the distance. We are now going to render those individually very efficiently, because that's already not good enough, because you've got just too many objects at that point. So we're able to summarize in the distance. And Mavericks' ability to summarize detail in the distance is on a completely different level to any battle royale game you would have seen. So that's why we're able to show high detail in the distance, is because this idea of hierarchy, grouping things according to you know, the fact that something might happen in the distance that's really relevant, and that means that you can't simply summarize that anymore as that's just a load of trees. Perhaps some of them have now fallen down. Right. We're able to do that through how we link in with SpatialOS, and SpatialOS stitches the appropriate data together. But then we marry that on the rendering end with sort of efficient rendering technology that's able to simply summarize things which are already known as not just individual trees in the distance, but a whole group. And it's a balancing between these different technologies of instancing, hierarchical level of detail, so grouping things together. There's a huge number of, without getting into real technical detail, Mavericks is using more up-to-date techniques than these other games, and it's how Mavericks is built, because we really, like, in terms of how we structured the game world, we are providing much more information to your game client effectively about what things can be grouped together, and that approach has enabled us to push level of detail way further than other games. Other games have got basic systems in for it that have been refined and work very well, but Mavericks is all about building a massive world, and so we've rethought some of these things from the ground up. So effectively, we're using a new kind of lodding, group lodding. We have all the old techniques as well, and they are vital in the sort of short to mid-range, but when you look in the distance, it's Mavericks' ability to stream in summarize chunks of the distance which still look incredibly high detail, where other games would simply have just removed them and then left you with a very lame experience as you drop in, as things fade and look blurry.
I remember when I was speaking to you guys, you were saying it has like an intelligent way of understanding what you're looking at and what out of that is like relevant. Is that part of that where it's the summary thing,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
As a player, one of the main benefits, obviously everything will look better, but when you're using a 16 times scope or whatever you happen to find, you're not going to see like a melted house type thing that you're trying to shoot a player, and it will look as a house looks. So yeah, especially with scopes, it will look a lot better.
We're more on that a little bit later, actually. There's a question on that. But given the way things stream in and out, this is a question that you hate, I know. But given the way things stream in and out, is this going to be a little bit more CPU bound, GPU bound? What's kind of doing the work on the client end for that? Is it both? If so, kind of why?
I think it's natural for for everyone to have questions about whether it's CPU, GPU bound. I mean, both games push both to the limits. The answer really depends. I would say that on the CPU side of things, it's the fact that Mavericks is built on really up-to-date rendering APIs. So, we began the rendering work, of course, using CryEngine, and that's recently been refactored. Well, not just the CryEngine that many will have played today, but the very latest, which has been entirely refactored as a sort of DX12 Vulkan-focused renderer.
And that low-level stuff in that, right?
Yeah, it basically means that the CPU overhead can be much less because the way you manage how data moves to the GPU is lower level, and you're able to be much more efficient. And Mavericks makes huge use of that. So the way data is now streamed to the GPU through modern rendering APIs is much more efficient than it used to be, and that's a massive reason why our CPU usage is still good, and we don't sort of run out of a scope there. It also comes down to how not only do we have these sort of driver overheads removed by being smarter about how things are streamed between the GPU and the CPU, but on the CPU, these lower level APIs enable you to spread the work out across multiple threads. So everyone will know that you have multiple core machines nowadays. CryEngine has already been really leading in terms of distributing work for a game engine on the CPU between multiple threads, because sort of game engines are traditionally known to be very bad at that, and you end up having one thread that's being maxed out, and not all the others, as other applications are able to use.
So whilst there's no kind of silver bullet of an answer, it's more efficient because of DirectX 12 and Vulkan
stuff. It's the new rendering APIs.
Better
multi-threading, new APIs. Smarter knowledge of the structure of the world has also helped make sure that we stream the right things at the right time. And again, there's loads of detail to that. So it's those three things that come together that reduce the CPU overhead. The GPU, that comes down to what we were talking about earlier. So smarter level of detail techniques mean that you are only using what you need on the GPU much more regularly. Another side to that there are really extreme examples. For example, we have some quite smart stuff that we're working on that even completely removes geometry in the distance and bakes it into textures, which are just sort of flat arrays of memory on the GPU, and we can literally remove huge amounts of cycles based on understanding the structure of the world in the distance, where previously it would either be an all or nothing, where you either rendered a lot of little objects or you just didn't and you got something that's stock and flat. But we have the ability to actually sort of do a 2.5D approximation in the distance, which literally it still looks like the 3D object would, but it doesn't have the overhead. So there are loads of real detailed things that we're looking at.
There's also like neat things we can do.
Yeah, lots of neat things, and they all come, it's a lot of individual systems, and some of them are already there, some of them we're still working on, but the real crux of what we're doing here that makes us different is that we have this better understanding of what the world is from like a data perspective, and as a result of that, this is unlocked approaches which haven't been used very much in other games, just because they've taken an existing engine and just turned the knobs as best they can, whereas we're seeing it from a much sort of higher level. We built the technology we're using around the idea that this is going to be a big game with different sections of the world streamed and stitched together. And it's the end-to-end process, both in SpatialOS, which is doing that in the cloud, and how that's networked, reducing the network overhead and enabling us to have, efficient networking code, and all the way to the renderer. And it's marrying that approach all the way across through our understanding of the structure of the game world. So there's not one small answer, but it's that's the conceptual answer. Right. It's that there are a lot of different techniques we're using, and they're all based on better understanding of a rich game world and the structure of the data that's inside of that.
So on the topic of the game world and kind of like the size of it and so on.
So just to quickly get back to that, I'm not sure if it would help the question asker, but I think the minimum spec for GPU we're looking at is the GTX 960, is it?
Yeah, so at the moment, it really depends, because we also want to hit high frame rates for the higher end cards. If you're looking like a smooth 60 FPS experience, yeah, we were even trying to target a bit lower than that. So 960 is a good sort of idea of like this card will run the game very well. So we're not trying to go, just because we have all this cool stuff doesn't mean that we're now only targeting the top end cards. Right. We haven't formalized the lower spec of the game yet. It will be lower than a 960. That's not the minimum requirement of the game, but that gives you an idea as a card that we think should run it very, very well. If you're going above that, we're either looking at higher frame rates or just sort of more embellishments. But you'd be quite surprised that, even on the sort of lower settings, the game still looks very, very good. We don't compromise on big things just to get it to low settings.
Okay. So yeah, on the topic of the game world being so big, you got all these players, they're reasonably spread out, hopefully, with the clever insertion of how they get in the game. How do we force them all together? Beyond the shrinking circle, what's going on there? Like you said about the objective system a little bit last time?
Yeah, so we want to, ideally, at the moment in other Battle Royale modes, you're only really exploring new areas to find new items, and it's very common that it's obviously always a risk-reward kind of situation. You found your sniper rifle, maybe it's not the sniper rifle you want, but you have a sniper rifle. Is it worth you going into a house in the distance? Probably not. You probably find some guy in a bathroom that's going to shoot you, so you want to avoid that. But we want to add these key points to the map that draw players in, so be it objectives, as we've loosely touched on before, where players think of it as an airdrop, but in different forms. Kind of players like, oh, I want to go, they know that there's something of value in that area, so they want to go contest it. Other things would potentially be going down the route of maybe there's a sniper tower on the map, and certain styles of buildings have higher chances to achieve or to contain items related to that building. So maybe there's a decent chance you find a scope in a sniper tower. Obviously, if those areas are within the center of the circle, players might tend to move to those more. It's definitely early stages, so I can't really tell before until we have more playtests with all these features and see what works and what doesn't.
Like
but it's definitely, we don't want to leave the game as players just want to hug the outside of the circle, that you don't get interaction. We're definitely looking to improve that area. So.
And I'd also say that flat out the amount of RNG is reduced. If you're thinking about other Battle Royale games versus Mavericks, there is just too much, oh, okay, I'm just going to go around houses now, not really thinking about what I'm doing. That's why we're looking at things like themed buildings, but we're also just looking at more information. So it's not just an airdrop, it's an airdrop where you actually know a little bit more about what's going to go down. We don't want to go into too many details because we're balancing what information is shown still. That's the point, until we've gone through more play testing, and we might even adjust this during the beta over the course of summer. We want to make this so that it's worth going towards these things, so people do make the decision, so it's not frustrating to a player, but fundamentally, we are reducing the amount of RNG and replacing that with just more information that the player can use to their advantage.
Touching on RNG again, we're trying to do a quite smart item spawning system as well. So as fun as complete RNG is, you go into a house, you find 5 snipers stacked on top of each other type thing. You're like, oh wow, but equally you go into a house and you find 5, I don't know, AK-47s. It's not as exciting. So the current item spawning system that we're kind of fleshing out is going down the route of maybe a big building is guaranteed to have a gun in it. Maybe a collection of buildings is guaranteed to have an assault rifle in it, blah, blah, blah. So you're never going to land in an area and be completely out of luck. You might find a bad gun, but we don't necessarily want to make the user feel like, oh, I've only found consumables in this house. I'm just
screwed. On a more technical level then, as we were exploring this world, how how do I phrase this? How do we handle the interaction between decals and details? So, for example, how long do footprints last, that kind of thing, what will they be affected by? If I'm running around in the rain, is that different to running around in the dry? If I'm running around on sand, is that different to running around on grass, whatever? Will sand fill in footprints with wind? Any of that kind of weird stuff going on? Will explosions erase them by getting rid of the terrains?
I mean, the short answer to that is yes.
Okay.
The longer, and also we're experimenting with that stuff right now. Right. For example, yes, definitely the mud footprints are from the mud, and they are different when you are on mud, squelching the mud in versus taking it off the mud and putting it on a material, on like concrete or something. You've just mentioned a lot of cool examples, and those are all things along the lines of what we're looking at right now. The final system is going to be a balance between that and how it causes the level design to shift, and that's perhaps more of a conversation for a design focused discussion. But we don't want it so that the map is made frustrating to play out well because of certain materials causing different trails. So it's all a matter of playtesting and balancing. So we've thought of all those things and we're working through it.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that if they're asking what is our limits, as in how long can we have footprint show, we don't really have a limit. We can keep them there for as long as we wish. It more comes down to like James related to the game design side of it, and how they feel that how long footprint should be staying for.
So they could technically be permanent, and with the right materials, would you say maybe you can mislead people a little bit and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We want deception gameplay as well. It's just a great demonstration that there's tactics. Maybe, yeah, right? I mean, the depth of tactics, is key, right? Like that's the whole point. You put more information in the game. Now it's a mind game between players, and high-level play in good strategic games always involves a component of that.
I think it'd be greatly nerve-wracking as well when you kind of see a footprint and then you see the footprint start to fade and disappear, and there's someone around, but you have no idea where they're at. Like that's like a good moment. Your heart starts racing, right? That's good stuff. Okay, so will animals leave trails and footprints? Speaking of things that mislead you.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
We really want, by providing this level of information, something I love about it is that you can always manipulate it, and you don't want. It's not fun to have information that always gives you away, and you're just going to die to these features. Obviously, there's still the plus side of you follow people, whatever, know where they are, but you always want that kind of counterbalance of, oh, this footprint's actually not from a human, it's, I don't know, a deer or something.
I spoke to some of my community members who came all the way down to EGX to see us the other day, and the first thing they said was, hey, can I use this information to lead someone in the house and kill them with a claymore or something? And I was just like, that sounds really cool. Yeah,
I really love when information can easily be used by both parties, attacker, defender.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so as you're navigating this huge world, this is like another game design question really. As you're navigating this huge world, is there anything to help you kind of defend yourself? Are you jumping between the trees? Is there any special mechanics at play there or anything like that?
So I've seen, well, there's obviously Fortnite where you can build walls, obviously not necessarily going down that route, but we're trying to go for the realism aspect. So aside from the level design allowing for players to have interesting combat, it is much more, as we're going down the realistic route, you find a tree, you get behind a tree. So very similar to other more realistic battle royale games, I would say.
I'd say there's a lot more to that though, with there being kind of the miniature maps within the map almost. There's kind of like well thought out areas. It's less of you running between fields in the first place. It's more about how you approach those areas, right? That's probably right.
We sort of said before, it's not like other battle royale games, because at the moment battle royale games just don't have very good level design. It's a case of imagine some of the more traditional, really great focused maps on FPSs, and leveraging how you would, the same way you'd leverage that kind of map, we have that kind of gameplay in Mavericks.
Which is nice, because then rather than having like a special way, like oh, you do less damage here or something like that, it's just play intelligently, and you're kind of not going to get in those situations and like approach it as you actually would. That's cool. Cool. Okay. So with binoculars being used to see as far apart of the map, running on a different server. So if you can see really, really far away, so you're seeing someone who's essentially on a different worker or a different server, does that mean you're essentially looking across multiple servers? And when you're looking through those binoculars, are you essentially being put through the server and you were like on that server now, and like leaving the current one, or how does that work?
I think the better way to think about it is that when you're playing the game, your client doesn't have details of other workers. Your client just has a connection straight to SpatialOS, and SpatialOS has this stitched view of the entire game world at once. So when you're looking down a scope, we can then request the data that is needed to be, for you to be able to see where you're looking with your binoculars, and then we can render with that based on where you're looking. It's not like, oh, I'm on this worker, I'm looking at someone else at another worker. How does that communication happen? It's this whole stitched environment put together with the entire game that we then use to render exactly what you need.
Which goes back to what you said about when you look at a house in the distance, it is still a house rather than just a lump of jam with a player floating in the middle.
So it will always be one server controlling or dictating what's allowed on the player, but you can get information, as George was saying, from others.
Okay, cool. So we have this big cluster of servers, they're all stitched together, all doing their thing. What happens if one of them goes down? Like if that happens, does that happen?
Of course it happens. Because you're running several of these workers on SpatialOS, one of the nice features that it has is that it has like disaster recovery. Right. Because all of the state of each entity is stored within SpatialOS and not on these workers, you can easily just have SpatialOS boot up another worker and just carry on from where it was, or if it doesn't need to, it can spread that load to the other workers that were already running and just carry on from where it needs to be as it recovers itself. Because it's just one of those things that sometimes there's crashes, but what is really important is not the crash itself. Fixing that, of course, is important, but what is important immediately is how you recover from that situation. And using a system like SpatialOS has is just the fastest way that we can ensure that there's like as minimal impact as possible on the gameplay.
Okay, there's a little bit of a weird one here with how will we avoid weak servers and the latency between servers. I think that kind of like, we're using Google is going to be the server?
Yeah, we'll be, all of our infrastructure will be on Google Cloud. In terms of latency between the servers, because they'll all be in the same data center, the latency between them will be very,
basically, because they're all in the same physical location, so the latency between servers is pretty much nothing.
I mean, just to be clear, like,
right?
we are, working on Google Cloud right now using, as both, where our SpatialOS clusters are, and it's also, the home of some of our really cool analytics stuff we're working on. Doesn't mean we're only ever going to use that. We can't confirm like other regions, might be other providers. But at the end of the day, it's always going to be that a world's not simulated by a stitching together of servers that are miles apart from each other. The latency between individual servers is very, very small, so that's not an issue really. It's sort of the same goes for are the servers themselves powerful enough. We are actually still, each individual server that we're using is still a very reliable, very powerful server. It's great that we can also disaster recover and that we can, make certain ones, scale up to make up for the fact that a different one crashed. But we haven't seen crashes. We're not optimizing crashes. It's very, very unlikely that servers are going to crash. It's fantastic that we can cover that. But if you think about it, how often are you playing, your favorite online FPS right now, and then, perhaps ignore Battle Royale because, they're not necessarily got the level of quality you'd expect. But if you look at a more traditional AAA title, how often do you just get disconnected in the middle of the map? Like very, very rarely. And we're at the same level as that. So it's not that we're likely to have crashes. It's just that it was an interesting question, and we do have an ability for, one worker goes down and straight away another one can scale over that space as well. And then another one can be booted up.
Okay, so magic question I'm sure a lot of people are actually really waiting for an answer for anyway, but it ties in really nicely, which is how I put it here, is what are the tick rate of these servers, like in a more normal sense?
Right now, 60 hertz.
Right.
But, which is, and stable, and stability is the massive focus here, like things should be, stable and behave you should expect. Now, we are entering the time when we're doing increasing amounts of playtesting, and we're also optimizing for competitive kind of gameplay as well. Could that be higher? Potentially. Do we want to drive away a casual audience because we put it crazy high? No, so we have to balance that. So I would say our answer at the moment is 60 hertz, but it's not a final number. We're not actually limited too badly in that respect. So we could raise it, but at the moment that's where we are.
That's a good answer. That's where a lot of kind of competitive games have sat, things where they found their appropriate middle ground between kind of the extreme where it bars out some of the lower end users and creating a good gameplay experience anyway. So that's a cool answer for a competitive player. I enjoy that one. Cool. So you already answered about service solutions scaling over time. Hardware changes, we would just change it out and that kind of thing. Same with player counts, we would just get more servers and throw them more into the worker pool. So with SpatialOS, giving the ability to host more functions on the server instead of the client, do you think that will lead to helping us prevent cheats, that kind of thing? You can put more of it on the server so that there's less room for people to fiddle with things on the client side?
We're in an interesting place with that. So, many of us have worked on games which are, MMOs and the key approach has been to put as much as possible on the server, and that's how you deal with cheating. It becomes almost impossible. But when you do that in a shooter, you compromise massively on latency. Mavericks, we think has a pretty groundbreaking approach to anti-cheat, and it's that while you can still have some stuff being done on the client to give you quick response, because we have the ability to distribute our data over this cluster of servers, we can, as necessary, request much more data from a single player to analyze what they've actually been doing. And because we have a full picture of the whole world, we can recreate exactly what they've been doing on their client.
It's like the old Punkbuster screenshots turn up to 11.
Yeah, so people who
Cool.
who are trying to build cheats are going to have a much harder time as we turn all these systems online. Now, we have other things to focus on. I think there's still work to do in terms of developing that platform, but we are starting from a much more powerful position than any other game in this category. Even going all the way up to like aimbots and really looking at the detail of how players have been doing small, fine-grained interactions with the game is something we can do, because other games, if they just say on a single server, there's a lot of overhead associated with gathering data off their players. So we use quite an interesting hybrid approach, and we can be very efficient on the network, but we can still allow the client to do certain things for short periods of time, because not only does that client have to validate, but the workers around it will validate that. The other clients nearby can validate it as well. So if we allow the client to get away with something, it doesn't really matter if someone's trying to cheat that, because the worker will very quickly work it out. The other clients as well will work it out, and you're not going to disrupt people's game. So there's a lot of detail to this, and we think we have an amazing approach and some really great initial work. I think that we're in a stronger position than other Battle Royale games. There's work there for a dedicated team, and that's something we're looking to do as we go through the beta and into launch, and it's going to be I'm sort of very excited about our approach to anti-cheat, but as I say, I think we have a fantastic approach. I think that we're going to be good in that department. It's an area I've worked in for other games and as of other people in the studio. But it's a journey we're still on, and I think the proof of that stuff will be when we go live. We'd happily share our numbers and how successful we are, and hopefully we'll blow people away.
Yeah, cool. Something to also mention, I guess, is just how the SpatialOS network is laid out. It means throughout development, we've been thinking about these types of things all the way through. So not only do we have everything that Jim, or aiming for everything that Jim's said, but it's from the ground up has been like a massive concern, because as I said, we all have experience with dealing with cheaters.
Yeah. Cool. So a few fun ones to finish off with then. Are we considering other projects in SpatialOS in the future? Are we just going to make Mavericks huge and add stuff to it? Are we doing both? What's the end game plan? What's the long-term plan?
I think it's a really good question for a sort of discussion like this, where we're talking about technology so much, and I mean, you could just imagine so many games this technology could be used in, and it'll be make them so much better. So we can't say that we won't want to do that. At the same time, I'll say right now we're really committed to a Mavericks roadmap. We want to make this game last decades, or we think that this kind of exciting, massively multiplayer shooter experience is something that we're building a fantastic platform for, and it's a kind of game, irrespective of the exact details of the game mode, it's the kind of gameplay experience that will be relevant for a long time. So that's what we're focused on right now with this technology. Right. But I have to agree that this technology can apply to a lot of other games, and we should definitely look into that. But of course, that's not our focus right now. We're finishing it first.
Cool. Okay, so this is a fun one because I know the answer to this. How long after recording these videos do we usually put these out?
Well, how long is it? How long is it last week?
It's usually a couple days.
Yeah.
Couple days, something like that. It's pretty hot off the press.
Yeah.
It's called 2 days.
To thank our video producer, Adam.
Yeah.
You turn the camera around.
Do you want to come in there? Huh? Okay. Okay, that's a no. Okay, so last question to end with then. Are we going to Gamescom in Germany?
We are thinking about it. We're currently in discussions. We can't confirm anything just yet, but we would be really excited to be able to take Mavericks to Gamescom, and we think it's a great place to be able to showcase it. It's something that we really want to do, but we haven't finalized any details yet, so unfortunately we can't confirm anything right at this moment in time.
Yeah, it's for us it's about focusing, of course, also on where we're going to launch our game. Gamescom won't be a sort of launch event for us, but it's definitely it's a big event. It's one I've been to before, and it's
it's a great opportunity for the people that are nearby as well to come and say hi.
Yeah,
it's fun.
And there are some technology partners that we're in discussions with that potentially want to show Mavericks alongside what they're showing at the event. So there are discussions going on, but yeah, it's not something we can confirm the details of yet.
Cool. Okay, so that's basically everything. That's a wrap. You see my questions? Perfect. Okay, so next week we're going to be covering
how we build
stuff.
the environment.
How we build the world.
Yes.
So next week, tune in for the Making Mavericks episode. It's going to be about building Mavericks in the world building sense, less in the tech building sense.
Making Mavericks, building Mavericks.
Making Mavericks, making Mavericks, making Mavericks. Liquid Ocelot. Right, so yeah, we'll be showing more about how we actually make Mavericks' world. We'll see a bit more of that next week, and then we'll talk about it the week after, which is going to be awesome. So yeah, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch TV, which we haven't used yet, but we'll definitely use at some point. Instagram, which we haven't used yet.
And join our Discord.
Join us on Discord. Come and say hi. Discord.gg/Mavericks, verified Discord server. Come say hi. We're all in there. Just come yell questions at us. You might get answered, depending on how busy we are. Cool.
See you soon.